Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the Great Hall. We are so pleased tonight to be with two venerable organizations, the Aspen Institute and the Public Theater. We share together a curiosity and a commitment to provoke and inspire the search for solutions, for common ground, for shared purpose. For purpose that can address some of the most complex problems facing our society, whether through art, literature, or academia. There is perhaps no more appropriate stage or gathering place than this great hall for an exploration of who needs truth. For 159 years, people have found their voices here. They've shaped and contested the issues of their day from this very lectern. They've launched movements and causes and ideas that were not yet accepted or even contemplated by the mainstream. Today, when the conversation is more fractured than ever, the idea of searching out and protecting the truth is perhaps more essential than it's ever been. Truth was an ideal central to our founder, Peter Cooper's thinking in the mid-1800s. An inventor, industrialist, and philanthropist, Peter Cooper said these words as he formed the Cooper Union, and I quote, "My design is to establish this institution in the hope that unnumbered youth will here receive the inspiration of truth in all of its native power and beauty, and find in it a source of perpetual pleasure to spread its transforming influence throughout the world." Around the same time, a little north of here in Amherst, Massachusetts, an American poet was establishing her voice. Emily Dickinson wrote, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Too bright for our infirm delight, the truth's superb surprise. As lightning to the children eased with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind." Truth and transformation, truth gradually revealed. Tonight we will explore these ideas through performance and discussion. So let's get things started. I'd like to welcome to the stage a very special guest. Damien Wetzel is at home on stages around the globe. For 20 years, he was a principal dancer with the New York City Ballet until his retirement in 2008. Since then, he has programmed, produced, and supported performances and initiatives that illustrate the value of arts in society with a special focus on education, social justice, economics, and diplomacy. Certainly, that's been the case in his current role as director of the Aspen Institute's art program. Among many other accomplishments, Damien served on President Obama's Committee on the Arts and Humanities, where he worked to bring arts to public schools. He is the creative genius behind this evening, and soon he will join the world of academia himself as the newly named president of Juilliard. We're thrilled that he's here with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Damien Wetzel.
Thank you, Laura, for that most kind introduction. It is indeed an honor to stand here in this hall with you. I have so many different feelings about this, but you already referenced that idea that art and culture that can live splendidly, that can live beautifully in isolation, can give us so much strength when we put them in the context of the issues that we face. I'm passionate about that possibility, not only for the solving or the asking the questions, but also for the art and the artists, because indeed these two things rise together, and they give us our record of what history and humanity really are. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the program in a moment, but before we do, I wanted to thank our other partner. The Public Theater is the home of theater and the home of democracy. When you think about the public theater, you have to remember the man, Joe Papp, who said, "We have free libraries, why not free theater?" And we have to all bow to that ideal. It is a true pleasure to partner once again with the Public Theater, and specifically with Stephanie Ibarra and her staff who run the Public Forum. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie to the stage.
Good evening. You know, as I was thinking about what to say up here tonight, I was reflecting on the weeks that we spent culling through centuries of plays and essays, poetry and music, and all of that artistic lineage in pursuit of one single idea, truth. And at the Public Theater, we see that play out, that pursuit of the idea of truth. Artists are exploring that 8 times a week, downtown, uptown, throughout the country, by way of new plays, music, Shakespeare, and every combination thereof. But what makes tonight particularly thrilling is the idea that we get to stand up here with our neighbors, Cooper Union, and our longtime friends, Aspen Institute, and stand together in the shared idea that the pursuit of truth, that art is central to a healthy democracy, and the pursuit of truth is not the artist's job alone, but the invitation here tonight with these 3 institutions and this constellation of humans is that each of us has a role to play in shaping our democracy, in shaping our culture, and in shaping the truth of our world. So I can't think of a more worthy pursuit on a Monday night in downtown New York City, and I'm just so thankful to the Aspen Institute and to Cooper Union for being here tonight. Thank you so much.
Laura. So just to set this up, you should know that Laura and I met as students. We met as students of being presidents. We went to something called the President's Institute, join me, and we learned in 6 days how to be college presidents.
Nailed it.
Nailed it, exactly. And Laura's got a jump on me. She's been president for some time, and we're honored to be doing this performance, this discussion, this essential act of democracy and participation as part of your inaugural week. So I'm thrilled to join you at this, in this venture.
Thank you. Thank you. So, you know, Damien and I had a moment in Cambridge where he said, Cooper Union, the Great Hall, I want to do something there about truth. And I said, let's do it, and it happened. It's amazing when 2 people can come together with wonderful teams around them to make something happen, and pretty much happen overnight.
Pretty much happened today, actually. But what you're about to see, by necessity, represents a brief and naturally incomplete survey of truth, and it'll go in the nature of theater and politics and real life and song and even dance and certainly poetry. And then following that section, we'll be joined by Michael Sandel. Michael Sandel, the prodigious thinker, the writer, the teacher, but perhaps above all, a guide to our democratic participation. Stand ready to be engaged. Stand ready to figure out what you really think. That's what that's going to be all about. But first, we're going to begin with some theater. And 2 of the pieces we wanted to call out because of the nature of them. Mark Twain stood in this hall and launched his career as a humorous orator. And
Lincoln also stood here as an orator and launched his career.
On his road to the presidency, widely claimed to be the launching pad to his national campaign. Both of those roles tonight will be taken on by one of our most esteemed actors. So we'll just get started with that. Please welcome John Lithgow.
I have pretty much made up my mind to run for president. What the country wants is a candidate who cannot be injured by investigation of his past history, so that the enemies of the party will be unable to rake up anything against him that nobody ever heard of before. If you know the worst about a candidate to begin with, every attempt to spring things on him will be checkmated. Now, I'm going to enter the field with an open record. I'm going to own up in advance to all the wickedness I have done. And if any congressional committee is disposed to prowl around my biography in the hopes of discovering any dark and deadly deed that I have secreted, Why let it prowl? In the first place, I admit that I treed a rheumatic grandfather of mine in the winter of 1850. He was old and inexpert in climbing trees, but with the heartless brutality that is characteristic of me, I ran him out of the front door in his nightshirt at the point of a shotgun and caused him to bowl up a maple tree where he remained all night while I emptied shot into his legs. I did this because he snored. I will do it again if I ever have another grandfather. I am as inhuman now as I was in 1850. I candidly acknowledge that I ran away at the Battle of Gettysburg. My friends have tried to smooth over this fact by asserting that I did so for the purpose of imitating Washington, who went into the woods at Valley Forge for the purpose of saying his prayers. This is a miserable subterfuge. I struck out in a straight line for the Tropic of Cancer because I was scared. I wanted my country saved, but I preferred to have somebody else save it. I entertain that preference yet. If the bubble reputation can be obtained only at the cannon's mouth, I am willing to go there for it, provided the cannon is empty. If it is loaded, my immortal and inflexible purpose is to get over the fence and go home. My invariable practice in war has been to bring out of every fight 2/3 more men than when I went in. This seems to me to be Napoleonic in its grandeur. My financial views are of the most decided character, but they are not likely perhaps to increase my popularity with the advocates of inflation. I do not insist upon the special supremacy of rag money or hard money. The great fundamental principle of my life is to take any kind I can get. The rumor that I buried a dead ant under my grapevine was correct. The vine needed fertilizing, my aunt had to be buried, and I dedicated her to this high purpose. Now, does that unfit me for the presidency? The Constitution of our country does not say so. No other citizen was ever considered unworthy of this office because he enriched his grapevines with his dead relatives. Why should I be selected as the first victim of an absurd prejudice? I admit also that I am not a friend of the poor man. I regard the poor man in his present condition as so much wasted raw material. Cut up and properly canned, he might be made useful to fatten the natives of the Cannibal Islands and to improve our export trade with that region. I shall recommend legislation upon the subject in my first message. My campaign cry will be, desiccate the poor working man, stuff him into sausages. These are the worst parts of my record. On them, I come before the country. If my country doesn't want me, I will go back again. But I recommend myself as a safe man, a man who starts from the basis of total depravity and proposes to be fiendish to the last. And I thank you.
Mr. William Shakespeare on Truth, Troilus and Cressida, Act 4, Scene 4.
I must then to the Grecians,
No remedy.
a woeful Cressid, mongst the merry Greeks. When shall we see again?
Here may my love be thou but true of heart, and
I true? How now, what wicked deem is this?
nay, we must not, and we must use expostulation kindly, for it is parting from us. I speak not, be thou true as fearing thee, for I will throw my glove to death himself, that there's no maculation in thy heart. But be thou true, say I, to fashion in my sequent protestation, be thou true, and I will see thee.
Oh, you shall be exposed, my lord, to dangers as infinite as eminent, but I'll be true.
And I'll grow friend with danger. Wear this sleeve.
And you this glove. When shall I see you?
I will corrupt the Grecian sentinels and see thee nightly with visitation, but yet be true.
Oh, heavens, be true again?
Hear while I speak it, love. The Grecian youths are full of quality. They're loving, well composed, with gifts of nature flowing and swelling o'er. With arts and exercise, how novelty may move and parts with person, alas, a kind of godly jealousy, which I beseech you call a virtuous sin, makes me afeard.
Oh, heavens, you love me not.
I a villain then. In this I do not call your faith in question so mainly as my merit. I cannot sing, nor heal the high lavolt, nor sweeten talk, nor play at subtle games, fair virtues all, to which the Grecians are most prompt and pregnant. But I can tell that in each of these there lurks a still and dumb discursive devil that tempts most cunningly, but be not tempted.
Do you think I will?
No, but something may be done that we will not. And sometimes we are devils to ourselves when we will tempt the frailty of our powers, presuming on their changeful potency. Come, kiss, and let us part.
My lord, will you be true?
Who, I? Alas, it is my vice, my fault. While others fish with craft for great opinion, I with great truth catch mere simplicity. Whilst some with cunning gild their copper crowns, with truth and plainness do I wear mine bare. Fear not my truth. The moral of my wit is plain and true. There's all the reach of it.
James Baldwin, from The Fire Next Time. The American Negro has the great advantage of having never believed the collection of myths to which white Americans cling. That their ancestors were all freedom-loving heroes, that they were born in the greatest country the world has ever seen, or that Americans are invincible in battle and wise in peace. That Americans have always dealt honorably with Mexicans and Indians and all other neighbors or inferiors. That American men are the world's most direct and virile. That American women are pure. Negroes know far more about white Americans than that. It can almost be said, in fact, that they know about white Americans what parents, or anyway mothers, know about their children, and that they very often regard white Americans that way. And perhaps this attitude, held in spite of what they know and have endured, helps to explain why Negroes, on the whole, and until lately, have allowed themselves to feel so little hatred. The tendency has really been, insofar as this was possible, to dismiss white people as the slightly mad victims of their own brainwashing. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jose Antonio Vargas, and this passage is, thank you. And this passage is from my forthcoming book, titled Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen. The truth is, migration has never been about legality, because legality has always been about power. And we, the estimated 11 million undocumented population in the US, more than 1 million of whom live in the New York area, have neither the power to make laws nor delineate borders. What we do know is that migration is the most natural thing people do. The root of how civilizations, nation states, and countries were established. The difference, however, is that when white people move, it's seen as courageous and necessary. Its manifest destiny wrapped in white man's burden. Yet when people of color move, illegally or illegally, the migration itself is subjected to questions of laws and morality. Is it a crime? Will they assimilate? There are 244 million migrants around the world, and many of us are migrating to countries that previously colonized and imperialized us. We have a human right to move, and laws should serve that right, not limit it. The unprecedented movement of people, what some people call a global migration crisis, is in reality a natural progression of history. Yes, we are here because we believe in the American dream, the search for a better life, the challenge of dreaming big. But we are also here because you were there. The cost of American imperialism and globalization, the impact of economic policies and political decisions. During this defining and volatile time in the US and around the world, we need a new language around migration and a new language around citizenship. Our survival depends on the creation and understanding of this new language. As Toni Morrison said, quote, "We die. That may be the meaning of life, but we do language. That may be the measure of our lives." Thank you.
Philip Levine, A Simple Truth. I bought $1.50 of small red potatoes, took them home, boiled them in their jackets, and ate them for dinner with a little butter and salt. Then I walked through the dried fields on the edge of town. In middle June, the light hung on in the dark furrows at my feet, and in the mountain oaks overhead, the birds were gathering for the night, the jays and mockers squawking back and forth, the finches still darting into the dusty light. The woman who sold me the potatoes was from Poland. She was someone out of my childhood in a pink-spangled sweater and sunglasses, praising the perfection of all her fruits and vegetables at the roadside stand, and urging me to taste even the pale, raw, sweet corn, trucked in all the way, she swore, from New Jersey. "Eat, eat," she said. "Even if you don't, I'll say you did." Some things you know all your life. They are so simple and true, they must be said without elegance, meter, and rhyme. They must be laid on the table beside the salt shaker, the glass of water, the absence of light gathering in the shadows of picture frames. They must be naked and alone. They must stand for themselves. My friend Honoree and I arrived at this together in 1965, before I went away, before he began to kill himself, and the two of us to betray our love. Can you taste what I'm saying? It is onions or potatoes, a pinch of simple salt, the wealth of melting butter. It is obvious. It stays in the back of your throat like a truth you never uttered because the time was always wrong. It stays there for the rest of your life, unspoken, made of that dirt we call earth, that metal we call salt, in a form we have no words for, and you live on it. Lucille Clifton, The Light That Came to Lucille Clifton. The light that came to Lucille Clifton came in a shift of knowing, when even her fondest sureties faded away. It was the summer she understood that she had not understood, and was not mistress even of her own off eye. Then the man escaped, throwing away his tie, and the children grew legs and started walking, and she could see the peril of an unexamined life. She closed her eyes, afraid to look for her authenticity. but the light insists on itself in the world. The light insists on itself in the world. The light insists on itself in the world. A voice from the non-dead past started talking. She closed her ears, and it spelled out in her hand. You might as well answer the door, my child. The truth is furiously knocking. Excerpt from Martin Luther King Jr.'s Nobel Prize acceptance speech. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. I believe that even amid today's mortar bursts and whining bullets, there is still hope for a brighter tomorrow. I believe that wounded justice, lying prostrate on the blood-flowing streets of our nations, can be lifted from this dust of shame to reign supreme among the children of men. I still believe that one day mankind will bow before the altars of God and be crowned triumphant over war and bloodshed, and nonviolent redemptive good will proclaim the rule of the land. And the lion and the lamb shall lie down together, and every man shall sit under his own vine and fig tree, and none shall be afraid. I still believe that we shall overcome. I think Alfred Nobel would know what I mean when I say that I accept this award in the spirit of a curator of some precious heirloom, which he holds in trust for its true owners. all those to whom beauty is truth, and truth beauty, and in whose eyes the beauty of genuine brotherhood and peace is more precious than diamonds or silver or gold.
Academics Without Borders. I was just called at the last moment to read a brief passage, and I'm so glad that President Sparks has put before you tonight the historic Lincoln podium, the Lincoln lectern, and she has automated it so that it is now a 21st century. President Sparks to be, President Wetzel to be, excuse me, thank you. Academia is like show business. It leaves us with issues. I've been asked to read a brief passage from On Bullshit by Harry Frankfurt. It begins thus: the mode of creativity upon which bullshit relies is less analytical and less deliberative than that which is mobilized in lying. It is more expansive and independent, with more spacious opportunities for improvisation, color, and imaginative play. This is less a matter of craft than of art. Hence the familiar notion of the bullshit artist. The bullshitter may not deceive us or even intend to do so, either about the facts or about what he takes the facts to be. What he does necessarily attempt to deceive us about is his enterprise. His only distinctive characteristic is that, in a certain way, he misrepresents what he is up to. I say that from this historic podium. When an honest man speaks, he says only that he is saying what he believes to be true, and for the liar, it is correspondingly indispensable that he considers his statements to be false. For the bullshitter, however, all these bets are off. He is neither on the side of the true nor on the side of the false. His eye is not on the facts at all, as are the eyes of the honest man or of the liar, except insofar as they may be pertinent to his interest in getting away with what he says. He does not care whether the things he says describe reality correctly. He just picks them out or makes them up to suit his purpose. Someone who lies and someone who tells the truth are playing on opposite sides, so to speak, in the same game. Each responds to the facts as he understands them, although the response of the one is guided by the authority of truth, while the response of the other defies that authority and refuses to meet its standards. The bullshitter ignores these demands. He ignores them altogether. He does not reject the authority of the truth as the liar does, and oppose himself to it. He pays no attention to it at all. By virtue of this, bullshit is a greater enemy of the truth than are lies. Thank you.
Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism. In an ever-changing, incomprehensible world, the masses had reached the point where they would, at the same time, believe everything and nothing, think that everything was possible and nothing was true. The totalitarian mass leaders based their propaganda on the correct psychological assumption. Under such conditions, one could make people believe the most fantastic statements one day and trust that if the next day they were given irrefutable proof of their falsehoods, they would take refuge in cynicism. Instead of deserting the leaders who had lied to them, they would protest that they had known all along that the statement was a lie, and would admire the leaders for their superior tactical cleverness. The result of a consistent and total substitution of lies for factual truth is not that the lie will now be accepted as truth and the truth be defamed as a lie, but that the sense by which we take our bearings in the real world and the category of truth versus falsehood is among the mental means to this end, is being destroyed.
These are the words of Barbara Jordan, Watergate Hearings, July 25th, 1974. Today I am an inquisitor. I believe hyperbole would not be fictional and would not overstate the solemnness that I feel right now. My faith in the Constitution is whole. It is complete. It is total. I am not going to sit here and be an idle spectator to the diminution, the subversion, the destruction of the Constitution. I would like to juxtapose a few of the impeachment criteria with some of the president's actions. Impeachment criteria. Those are impeachable who behave amiss or betray their public trust. Beginning shortly after the Watergate break-in and continuing to the present time, the president has engaged in a series of public statements and actions designed to thwart the lawful investigation by government prosecutors. Moreover, the president has made public announcements and assertions bearing on the Watergate case, which the evidence will show he knew to be false. These assertions, false assertions, impeachable. Those who misbehave, those who behave amiss or betray their public trust. If the impeachment provision in the Constitution of the United States will not reach the offenses charged here, then perhaps that 18th century Constitution should be abandoned to a 20th century paper shredder. Has the president committed offenses and planned and directed and acquiesced in a course of conduct which the Constitution will not tolerate? This is the question. We know that. We know the question. We should now forthwith proceed to answer the question.
Abraham Lincoln, Cooper Union, February 27th, 1860. Let me guard a little against being misunderstood. I do not mean to say we are bound to follow implicitly in whatever our fathers did. To do so would be to discard all the lights of current experience, to reject all progress, all improvement. What I do say is that if we would supplant the opinions and policy of our fathers in any case, we should do so upon evidence so conclusive, an argument so clear, that even their great authority, fairly considered and weighed, cannot stand. And most surely not in a case whereof we ourselves declare they understood the question better than we. If any man at this day sincerely believes that a proper division of local from federal authority forbids the federal government to control as to slavery in the federal territories, he is right to say so, but to enforce his position by all truthful evidence and fair argument which he can. But he has no right to mislead others who have less access to history and less leisure to study it into the false belief that our fathers who framed the government under which we live were of the same opinion, thus substituting falsehood and deception for truthful evidence and fair argument. If our sense of duty forbids this, then let us stand by our duty, fearlessly and effectively. Let us be diverted by none of those sophistical contrivances wherewith we are so industriously plied and belabored. Contrivances such as groping for some middle ground between the right and the wrong, as vain as the search for a man who should be neither a living man nor a dead man. Neither let us be slandered from our duty by false accusations against us, nor frightened from it by menaces of destruction to the government, nor the threat of dungeons to ourselves. Let us have faith that right makes might. And in that faith, let us, to the end, dare to do our duty as we understand it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Sandel.
Thank you. During the Civil War, the Union armies sang "His Truth is Marching On." Today we ask, whose truth? Whose truth is marching on? Today, truth is in trouble, as you can see and hear. And truth is not the only thing in trouble. Truth is in trouble, and so is democracy. And many have the haunting sense that there's a connection between the two. And that's the question I'd like to explore with you tonight. Are these two conditions related, and if so, how? Now, there is a familiar answer to this question, a familiar picture about the relation between the troubles of truth and the troubles of democracy. The familiar answer is we're losing hold of the distinction between what's true and what's false. We have social media that traffic in fake news, a president with, how to put it, a difficult relation to truth, a growing skepticism among many about science and the evidence it offers. And so the intuition, so the fear that this post-truth condition complicates the civic project, that it deprives citizens, democratic citizens, of the facts they need to deliberate about the common good. We worry that in a culture of lies and alternative facts, we may even, if we're not careful, be opening the way to tyranny. That's the worry that lingers like a dark cloud above our politics today. The question I'd like to explore with you is whether this picture is right. Or is truth not all it's cracked up to be? Let me begin just by taking a quick survey. By a show of hands, how many agree with the following statement, The loss of respect for truth these days poses a serious threat to democracy. How many agree with that statement? And how many don't? Most, you got one here. In the student section, I noticed. Well, we'll come to you. I'd like to begin by stepping back from the question of truth and politics and ask about truth itself, truth-telling and lying. Is it always wrong to lie? You can probably think of situations where you would think it right to lie. The Talmud allows 3 exceptions to the requirement of truthfulness. A scholar who's asked whether he knows a certain passage of Talmud, a real scholar, may say falsely that he doesn't, to avoid an immodest display. That's one. The second exception is he may lie if asked about the quality of hospitality he has received in order to spare his host a parade of unwelcome guests. Seems reasonable. Finally, the third case, a person's entitled to lie if asked about such intimate matters as the performance of his conjugal duties. Maybe on the grounds of the impropriety of the question. That's the Talmud, but Kant disagreed. I'm not sure he had read that particular tractate of the Talmud. Kant, the 18th century Prussian philosopher, held that it's always wrong to lie, regardless of the consequences. He took a very hard line against lying because he thought it was a violation of respect for persons as rational beings. And he was challenged by another philosopher who said, he gave him a case, a tough scenario. Suppose a murderer comes to your door looking for his victim and asks, is this person hiding in your house? This is your friend who is hiding in your house. Is it morally permissible to lie to the murderer at the door? Kant says even in that case, it's wrong to lie, morally wrong to lie. Now that's, in a way, the ultimate test of whether truth is all it's cracked up to be. Now that may seem a crazy position, overly stern. How many think in the case of the murder at the door, you nonetheless have a moral obligation to tell the truth? How many agree with Kant? Anyone? Not even you. Anyone? Everybody else thinks it's... And what would be the reason? Let's begin by hearing people's reasons. Why, those of you, most of you, who think it would be all right to lie in that case, why would it be all right to lie? Who will give us a reason? To prevent a greater harm, namely the murder. So if life is at stake, it's always all right to lie, would you say? And that would apply also to wartime? Let's stick with ordinary life. Suppose that we're not talking about a murderer. Suppose someone gives you a gift, of a hideous tie. And they wait expectantly for your reaction. And they say, how do you like it? Is it morally permissible to lie in that case? How many say yes? How hideous is the tie? Very bad. Very bad. How many say no? It's not morally permissible to lie in that case. All right, and who? All right, go ahead. Why? Tell us why. Who will tell us why? Someone who thinks. Go ahead. Yes. So truth has its uses. You can't be kind, be vague. All right, well, who said that? All right, let's have that person stand up and give them the microphone. If you can't be kind, be vague.
If you can't be kind, be vague.
What's that?
You said me to say it into the
All
microphone.
right, first, tell us your name.
Barry Drogan.
All right, Barry, let's put yourself in that situation. And you say it is or is not all right to lie in that case.
It is all right to lie because
no, but you said be vague.
Being vague is kind of a form of lying.
It's
certainly not a way of being truthful.
All right, let's suppose. All right, let's play it out. I want to hear what you'll say. I present this tie. I say, how do you like it? You say?
Well, it is quite a tie.
All right. It is quite a tie. Now, what Barry Barry didn't lie. That was a misleading truth. And Barry has just given us Kant's answer. He's given us a lesson in Kant, believe it or not. Did you realize that? Here's why. Thank you for that, Barry. Here's why. Kant's point is, when you face the murderer at the door, you can deceive the murderer, provided you tell what is, strictly speaking, the truth. The real question is not whether to help the murderer kill your friend. That would be terrible. But morally speaking, it matters that you adhere to the truth, even if it means saying to the murderer at the door, the murderer says, is your friend there? I saw her a little while ago at the grocery store down that way. For Kant, there's a morally important difference between a misleading truth like that and an outright lie. No. And Barry's moral intuition about the artful dodge to spare someone's feelings without actually lying to them is exactly Kant's point, and the moral nub of the point is that you might say, well, if you're trying to deceive and if you succeed in deceiving without actually lying, isn't that cavilling? Isn't that hair-splitting? But Kant says no, because the very attempt to craft a careful dodge pays a certain respect to the duty to tell the truth that a bald-faced lie doesn't. Now, many journalists thought about this back during the Clinton years. You remember the Clinton scandal. And the famous statement he made. You remember? I did not have sexual relations with that woman. He and his lawyers, when it came to impeachment, claimed he hadn't lied exactly. Now, I'll have to rely on your memories to, I don't want to spell out, but some of you will remember the distinction that he drew. You want to remind us explicitly, I think. But his claim was he was strictly speaking telling the truth, even though he was aiming to deceive in the way that Barry suggested, and for that matter, Immanuel Kant suggested. Well, this is a very short ethics lesson in truth-telling in ordinary life. But now let's turn back to politics, to presidential lies. Now, or false statements. Let's see if you can tell who said this. I have said this before. I'll give you a hint. This was in 1940. I have said this before, but I shall say it again and again and again. Your boys are not going to be sent into any foreign wars. 1940. That was FDR. 1964. We are not about to send American boys 10,000 miles away from home to do what Asian boys ought to be doing for themselves. Who said that? That's LBJ. The list could go on. Richard Nixon's often repeated statement that he didn't participate in the cover-up of Watergate. George H.W. Bush's famous line, "Read my lips, no new taxes." You remember that. And George W. Bush, who, according to one study, on 232 occasions stated that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Now, lying has increasingly become a political question, so much so that there is a fact-checking, nonpartisan fact-checking agency called PolitiFact that does those fact checks of presidential claims, and they've started to give an award for the lie of the year. The first was awarded in 2009, that's when they began, to Sarah Palin's famous claim that the Affordable Care Act included death panels. That got the prize, the first annual such prize. In 2013, the prize went to President Barack Obama for the often repeated claim, if you like your health care plan, you can keep it. Even though when the Affordable Care Act was enacted, some 4 million people were sent letters canceling their existing plans. They awarded him the award in 2013. In 2015, as the campaign season was heating up, the award went to the campaign misstatements, plural, of Donald Trump. It was an award for his body of work rather than for a particular statement. Kind of like those Lifetime Achievement Awards at the Oscars. But and then in 2017, he was given the award for his claim that, quote, this Russia thing is a made-up story, an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election they should have won. So he's a repeat recipient of the award. But what I would like to ask you, get your views about, is about the relative moral gravity of untrue statements. And I'd like to narrow the list to 4, 3 of which I've already mentioned. And I'd like you to raise your hand for the one that you consider the most egregious, the most morally objectionable statement. I'll quickly read the choices. George H.W. Bush, read my lips, no new taxes. That's number 1. Number 2, Bill Clinton, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. Number 3, Obama, if you like your present plan, you can keep it. 4, Donald Trump, quote, Mexico will pay for the wall. All right, those are the contenders. How many, which is the most egregious, the most morally objectionable? How many vote for the first? Read my lips, no new taxes. Very few, if any. I did not have sexual relations with that woman. All right, now we've got a handful. How about, if you like your present plan, you can keep it? Few more. And how many vote for Mexico will pay for the wall? That seems to be the winner. Now, why someone who voted for the last one, who voted in the plurality, who will tell us why he or she considers that statement a more egregious or morally objectionable one than the others? Why is that a worse claim? Yes, stand up and tell us your name.
Hi, my name is Hazel Weiser. I think it's the worst because it's underlying racism of the statement and of the purpose of the statement is so morally egregious to me.
All right, it's Hazel? Yeah. All right, let me ask you a question. Follow up? Stay there. So you find that the most egregious because of its what you take to be its underlying racism, and what's interesting about that is, suppose he kept the promise, making it true. On your reason, would that make it less egregious or more egregious?
Well, I mean, the underlying racism is still there. Because
so it's independent of the truth or falsity of the claim.
That's right.
Okay, so what's interesting there is, and this, I don't know whether this is the reason that the plurality voted for that one. What's interesting is, it's not to do with the truth of it, because the objection would equally hold if he kept the promise. That's interesting. Is there anyone who has, who voted either for that one or for any of the others who can point to an objection related to the untruth or to the breaking of the promise rather than objecting to the sentiment? Yes. Yes, in the third row. Yeah, go ahead. Stand up.
Thank you. My name is Anil. And the reason I find number 4 most objectionable is because of the scope of it. When I look at things, probably like an engineer, the scope of something is very important, and that's covering a much larger scope than any of the other.
By the scope, you meaning the significance of the policy that it refers to?
And the number of people it might affect.
Okay, so there you too are pointing to that you dislike the policy and the number of people it will affect, but if he kept that promise, it would not be a lie, right? But you would still dislike it just as much, no?
No, my definition of lies, I guess, and maybe that's slightly different, is telling an untruth deliberately. I know something to be untrue,
right?
And I state it. And the scope is really how many people does it affect.
All right, and so for something to be a lie, it has to be a deliberate, keep the microphone for a second, a deliberate untruth.
Yes. I have to know it's not true, and I still have to,
right.
And still have to say that it is so.
And so do you think that when he made that statement repeatedly during the campaign, he knew perfectly well that Mexico would not pay for the wall?
That is the assumption on which I'm basing my belief, yes.
And if you learned that due to some secret arrangement he had made, they really would pay for it, or if out of utter folly he wrongly believed they would pay for it, then it would be okay?
No, let's divide the two cases. The first case you gave was, in which case there was some sort of agreement that you knew that was true.
Right. Then you would not object.
Right.
You wouldn't?
I would not object. I would not object because of the...
On the grounds
of the definition that I...
And if through some delusion he really did believe that Mexico would pay for the wall, that would also get him off the hook, morally?
No, I think once we bring in delusion, then I'm going into DSM, so that's different.
Yeah, but it's no longer a deliberate untruth in that case, right? Is there anyone, what's interesting is that the reason so far people object most to that statement seems to be they despise the policy. Which is not to do with the truth or falsehood, because if the promise is kept in a way that's worse than if it isn't. Is there anyone who thinks that any of these statements are morally objectionable because they're lies or false promises, independent of your like or dislike of the policy that they reflect? In the very back. Go ahead.
I think a lot of this has to do with the credibility of the source. I think that most people, or I shouldn't say most people, a lot of people don't really take Donald Trump seriously as it is. So for him to say something like that lie, I think a lot of people already don't take it seriously. Whereas when someone like President Obama says that 4 million people, or whatever the quote was.
If you like your plan, you can keep it.
If you like your plan, you can keep it. I think there was a tendency for people to trust that, and the fact that he didn't hold good on that promise was a problem, I think.
So you voted for number 3, the Obama statement?
Yeah, or number 1, either way.
Number 1, no, read my lips, no new taxes.
Yeah.
Those were worse than the Trump statement.
Yeah, I think because of the perceived credibility of the people saying that.
I see, because in the case of Obama and even George W. Bush, you or many people believed them.
Well,
so that was more disillusioning.
Yeah.
Whereas you weren't disillusioned when you learned that Trump said something that was untrue or implausible.
Yes.
You went in eyes wide open to begin with.
Yes.
All right. What's interesting is that we're having trouble identifying some independent moral value to truth or to promise keeping that is independent either of our opinions about the underlying policies or our expectations about whether the speaker really is credible. Yes. Do you have can you make an intrinsic case for truth-telling that we've had trouble identifying so far?
I think intent is an issue, because I think Obama, when he said that,
yes,
he thought he could follow through on that. I think George Bush thought that he was not going to raise taxes.
Right.
With Donald Trump, he knew perfectly well Mexico would never pay for the wall, and so did the rest of the world. So the intent was deceiving, whereas the others did not deliberately intent. Their intent was different.
Right, but if you're right, then nobody believed him anyhow, including in that even he didn't believe the claim, then the
That's right. Donald Trump never believed it, and neither did anybody else.
But then where is the intent to deceive?
He did intend to deceive. He thought he was selling it as a salesperson. He was selling it to those people out there that did believe it.
Right.
Not everybody.
There were some.
Yes, enough that he won.
right. All right. Actually, that takes us, thank you for that. Thanks to everyone who's explained his or her vote as we've been exploring presidential true and untrue statements. Now, we've been so far discussing truth in relation to fact or to accuracy or to promises kept. But there is another sense of truth that is we sometimes would call moral truth, that has not to do with accuracy to facts of a kind that science could, or a good journalist could confirm or falsify. In fact, some of the most potent invocations of truth in politics are of this kind. 1776, Thomas Jefferson. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Truths. Now, what kind of truths are those exactly? It's certainly a statement of moral ideals. And it seems we understand what he means when he says, we hold these truths. But the truth is not factual truth. It's moral truth. Or the passage we just heard from Martin Luther King. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. Unarmed truth. He's not talking here about something that could be fact-checked. He's talking about moral truth. Or what about the Battle Hymn of the Republic that Brandon Victor Dixon just so magnificently sang? Two questions about it. How many found as you listened to the battle hymn, how many found it inspiring and stirring, and in that sense, true? How many were moved by it, are moved by it? Now, here's a slightly different question. As you listened to the lyrics, how many of you found the lyrics true? I'll read out the last stanza that Brandon sang. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea with a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free while God is marching on. How many think that's true? Raise your hand. I see only about 3 or 4 hands. And yet almost everyone finds it morally true. Now, how can that be? Who can explain this seeming discrepancy between actual, factual truth as you see it and what moves or inspires you, what you find morally true? Who can explain that discrepancy? Yes, stand up, tell us your name. Chauncey.
I think it's the same intentionality. The intention to deceive. I mean, for example, two of the statements you said weren't lies, technically. The Bill Clinton statement, if I said...
No, but let's go. I want to go back to the battle hymn.
Okay, battle hymn.
All right, I want to go back to that. Why is it, how can it be moving? How can it stir such deep resonance in us if very few of us consider it factually true?
Well, there's to reference another philosopher and thinker, Plato has the Platonic truth, right? This ideal that can never be reached. And the greatest works of art that we know of sort of point to that thing.
You're right.
So we can admire the nobility in it, and we can admire the sentiment. Like, is it noble to lay your life down for another human being? Absolutely.
Yes.
That's unquestionable.
Right.
Do we think it happens every day or ever? You know, I was on the subway today, and someone's getting harassed, and the entire train is quiet. You know, tens of people sitting there, and no one stands up, no one says anything, myself among them. And your heart yearns to do this thing that is noble and truthful and so forth.
Right.
But the end, you just pointed out, the end stands at the end of it is death. You know, giving up everything in order for someone else to prosper.
Great. Chauncey brings us to art. Now, art in a way deceives. These great actors we heard perform. I'll let you in on a secret. That wasn't really Mark Twain. Right, John? That was John. John, in a way, I suppose you could say, was deceiving us. He drew us in, and because he read it so compellingly, or when he was Winston Churchill, which I watched, Wrapped, I sort of thought, there was Winston Churchill. Now you might say, insofar as I was drawn in, I was in a way being deceived. No? I found it compelling. I found it compelling. Now you'll say, no, I really knew, if I watched the credits afterwards, who that was. John. Here, let's get John a microphone. Wait. Stand up. We've got a microphone.
It's a matter of giving yourself over to a fiction. It's allowing...
To a fiction.
To a fiction.
But fiction is false, isn't it?
It's a suspension of disbelief that you're eager to have, just because it means something to you emotionally.
Right.
I mean, it's what you're dying for disbelief to be completely suspended.
Yes.
It never happens, because
Right.
you always know it's a fiction.
Right.
But the closer you get to it, the more the art is successful, the more the lie is successful.
Right.
You want that lie, because it means something to you. I think that the same goes for, in the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea. That line, we remember when we first heard that line when we were children, and it stirs something emotional into it.
Yeah.
We hear it sung so beautifully, and the musical phrase, all these things.
Right.
It just opens you up to emotion. I mean, emotions play a sort of part in seeking out untruth. Sometimes you want an untruth.
Does that mean, John, that moral truth rests upon, draws upon, is nourished and stirred by fiction?
Well, fiction and truth are two different things.
But not completely different. That's what you're telling us. Your fiction, the art of acting, gets at truth, doesn't it?
Yes, it gets at a version of truth. It gets at a fictionalized truth.
No, you want to go further. It gets at the real thing, doesn't it?
Well, it's an alternate truth.
Oh, all right, thank you for that. Touché. It's interesting. Our discussion about truth in politics, maybe not surprisingly, has carried us to a discussion of the truth in art. And after all, what we've been doing collectively tonight, and here I want to step back from the discussions we've had and see if I can draw together the moral of the story. So, and as I do that, we can invite, if they're still here, the Who Needs Truth band to return. We began with art, with performances. And then we started talking about politics and the relation of truth to politics and the fear that we're losing hold of truth these days in our public life. And in trying to think through together what truth has to do with politics, we seem led to the conclusion, maybe it's a provisional conclusion, that the real truth in politics that matters can't fully be captured by fact-checking. Because part of politics, maybe the central part, involves rhetoric, the power to persuade, to be compelling, to move people, to reason with them, but to reason in a way that touches them. Maybe this is what Emily Dickinson meant when she said, tell the truth, but tell it slant. The truth must dazzle gradually. Great political leaders understand this, that the truth must dazzle gradually. Great artists and performers help us see the connection between pretending and knowing. And so there is a trouble. Truth is in trouble these days in our politics, and democracy is in trouble too. But from what I've heard from our discussion tonight, I would suggest that the best way to protect democracy is not simply to rest content with fact-checking, but to engage in the kind of democratic politics and civic deliberation, reasoning and persuading and arguing and moving our fellow citizens as the only sure way of fending off, of contending with the dark clouds that hover over our politics today. Truth in politics is more than facts. Politics at its best seeks a kind of moral truth that the greatest political figures and also the greatest artists and performers help us see. Thank you all very much. Thank you. And let me thank you. Let me bring up our artists and our performers to join me on. Come on. Come on out. Come on. Let's bring them all. And Damien. Thank you. Thank you. Great. Thanks so much. Thank you. Damien, you too, come on.